The gunshot that killed Benjamin Kane was still echoing through the canyon when his wife Beatrice found his body lying in the dust beside their overturned wagon. And in that moment, every hope she had ever carried in her heart died with him. It was September 1878 in the unforgiving territory of New Mexico, where the land stretched endless and cruel under a merciless sun. Beatrice Kane knelt beside her husband's body, her calico dress soaking up his blood, her hands trembling as they hovered over his chest. She was 22 years old, and she had believed in tomorrow. She had believed in the farm they would build, the children they would have, the life they would carve from this wild country. But belief was a luxury she could no longer afford. The bandits had taken everything. The horses, the supplies, the small lockbox containing the money they had saved for 3 years back in Missouri. They had left her with a corpse and a broken wagon wheel and miles of desert in every direction. She did not cry. Crying was for women who still had something to lose. She buried Benjamin herself, scraping at the hard earth with a piece of wood from the wagon until her hands bled and the sun began its descent toward the horizon. She marked the grave with stones and spoke no words over it. Words were empty things, and she was done with emptiness. When the rider appeared on the ridge as she was finishing, Beatrice did not look up. She heard the horse's hooves crunching over the rocky ground, heard the leather creak as the man dismounted, but she kept stacking stones with mechanical precision. If he was one of the bandits returned to finish the job, so be it. Death would be simpler than whatever came next. "Madam," the man said, his voice low and careful. "Madam, are you hurt?" Beatrice placed the last stone and stood, turning to face him. He was tall, maybe 30 years old, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were dusty from travel, his hat worn at the brim. He had a revolver on his hip, but his hands were raised slightly, showing he meant no threat. His eyes were a startling gray, like storm clouds, and they held a sadness that seemed older than his years. "No," she said flatly. "Your husband?" "Yes." The cowboy looked at the grave, then at the broken wagon, then back at her face. Whatever he saw there made him choose his next words carefully. "My name is James McCoy. I have water and supplies. There is a town about 15 miles south of here. I can take you there. I have no money." "I did not ask for money." Beatrice studied him with eyes that had gone cold in the past few hours. She saw no deception in his face, but she also saw no reason to trust him. Trust was another luxury she had lost. Still, practical necessity remained. She could not survive out here alone. "Fine," she said, and walked toward his horse without another word. James McCoy watched her for a moment longer, something like recognition flickering across his features, as if he knew exactly what it looked like when a person stopped hoping. He had seen it in the mirror often enough. He gathered what could be salvaged from her wagon, tied it to his saddle, and helped her mount his horse before swinging up behind her. They rode in silence as the sun painted the desert in shades of orange and crimson. Beatrice sat rigid in front of him, her spine straight, her hands gripping the saddle horn. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing against her back, could smell leather and dust and sage. She felt nothing about it. She felt nothing about anything. "The town is called Montezuma," James said after an hour had passed. "It is not much, but there is a boarding house. The woman who runs it is called Mrs. Henderson. She is kind." Beatrice said nothing. "I am sorry about your husband. Are you?" It was not a question, and James heard the flatness in her tone. He had heard it before, in the voices of men who had seen too much killing during the war, in the eyes of children left orphaned by disease or violence. It was the sound of someone who had cut themselves off from feeling because feeling hurt too much. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." They rode on. The stars began to emerge, pinpricks of silver in the darkening sky. A coyote called in the distance, lonely and wild. Beatrice stared straight ahead, her eyes dry and empty. Montezuma emerged from the darkness like a cluster of dim lights fighting against the vast night. It was a small town, maybe 40 buildings clustered along a single main street, with a few scattered homesteads on the outskirts. James guided his horse toward a 2-story building with a painted sign that read Henderson's boarding house. Lamplight glowed warm in the windows. He helped Beatrice dismount, and when his hands touched her waist, he felt how thin she was, how she trembled despite her rigid control. He knocked on the door, and a moment later it opened to reveal a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. "James McCoy," Mrs. Henderson said with genuine warmth. "I have not seen you in 3 months. Are you finally staying instead of just passing through?" "Not tonight, Helen. This is Mrs. Kane. She needs a room and she needs kindness. Her husband was killed by bandits this afternoon." Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted immediately to one of compassion. She reached out and took Beatrice's hands in her own, and Beatrice allowed it with the passive acceptance of someone who had given up making decisions. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in, come in. I will get you fed and settled. Do not you worry about a thing." "She has no money," James said quietly. "Did I ask about money? Shame on you, James McCoy. Get her things and bring them up. 2nd room on the left upstairs. And you come back down after. You look half-starved yourself." James did as he was told, carrying Beatrice's few salvaged possessions up to a small but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Beatrice stood in the center of the room, looking at nothing in particular. Mrs. Henderson bustled about, lighting the lamp, pouring water into the basin, pulling back the quilt on the bed. "There is soap here, dear, and clean towels. I will bring you up some supper in just a moment. You take your time, wash up, rest. You are safe here." Beatrice nodded mechanically. Mrs. Henderson exchanged a worried glance with James, then ushered him out and closed the door softly behind them. Downstairs in the boarding house kitchen, James sat at the worn table while Mrs. Henderson prepared plates of stew and cornbread. She worked in silence for a while, then said, "That girl has the look of someone who has given up. I know. Will you be staying to help her?" James looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of hard work and harder living. "I do not know what help I can give." "The same help someone gave you when you needed it. You remember how you were when you first came through here 5 years ago. After your family died in that fire, you had that same look in your eyes, like you were already dead, just waiting for your body to figure it out." James was quiet. He did remember. He remembered wanting to put his gun in his mouth and end it. He remembered an old rancher named Tom Sullivan, who had given him work when he could barely function, who had let him sleep in the barn and paid him fair wages, and never asked questions when James would disappear for days to drink himself unconscious in some canyon. Tom had died 2 years back, left James his horse and saddle and a letter that said, "You paid me back every day you chose to keep living. Do the same for someone else." "She does not want hope," James said finally. "She made that very clear without saying a word." "Then hope for her until she is ready to hope for herself. You know how it works, James. You cannot force it, but you can carry it for someone until they are strong enough to carry it themselves." James ate the stew Mrs. Henderson put in front of him, thinking about the woman upstairs who had buried her husband with bleeding hands and no tears. He thought about how he recognized the particular quality of her despair, because it matched his own from years past. He thought about Tom Sullivan and second chances and the weight of hope when you were too tired to bear it alone. "I will stay for a while," he said. "I have some money saved. I can work. Maybe help her figure out what comes next. Mrs. Henderson smiled and patted his shoulder. That is good. That is real good. Upstairs, Beatrice Kane sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. She had washed her face and hands, removing the dust and blood, but she still felt filthy down to her bones. Mrs. Henderson had brought supper on a tray, but Beatrice had only managed a few bites before her stomach rebelled. The food sat cooling beside her. She thought about Benjamin, about how excited he had been when they left Missouri. He had been so full of plans and dreams, talking endlessly about the farm they would have, the fruit trees he would plant, the children who would run through fields of their own. She had loved his optimism even when it seemed foolish. Now it just seemed cruel. Hope was a lie people told themselves to make the inevitable disappointment hurt more. She lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She simply existed, waiting for morning because that was what bodies did. They kept going even when the person inside them had stopped. Over the next few days, James McCoy became a quiet presence in Beatrice's peripheral vision. He found work at the livery stable, mucking stalls and tending horses. He took his meals at the boarding house. He asked nothing of Beatrice, made no demands on her attention, but he was there. Always there, solid and steady, like a landmark you could navigate by without having to acknowledge it directly. Beatrice spent most of her time in her room, coming down only for meals that she barely touched. Mrs. Henderson worried, but did not push. James simply existed in the same space, occasionally mentioning small things like the weather or the new foal born at the stable, never expecting responses, and never showing disappointment when he received none. A week after her arrival, Beatrice came downstairs to find James repairing a broken chair in the boarding house dining room. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, fitting joints, sanding rough edges. She watched him from the doorway, and for the first time since Benjamin's death, she felt something other than numbness. It was only the faintest flicker of curiosity, like a coal that had been buried in ash for so long it seemed dead, until you noticed the tiniest glow still present at its core. "Why are you doing that?" she asked, her voice rusty from disuse. James looked up, surprised to be addressed directly. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned it was broken. I had time." "She is not paying you, no." "Then why?" James set down his sandpaper and looked at her properly. "Because fixing things feels better than leaving them broken." Beatrice absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. Some things cannot be fixed. That is true. But some things can. I try to focus on those. She stood there for a long moment, then turned and went back upstairs. But the next day, she stayed downstairs a little longer. And the day after that, she sat in the parlor with a book she did not read while James repaired a loose floorboard in the hallway. They did not speak, but she was beginning to tolerate his presence, like a wild animal slowly accepting that not all humans meant harm. 2 weeks after Beatrice arrived in Montezuma, James found her standing on the boarding house porch in the early morning, staring at the distant mountains. He came to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance, saying nothing. They stood like that for several minutes before Beatrice spoke. "I do not know what to do now." It was the first vulnerable thing she had said, the first acknowledgement that she was still a person capable of uncertainty rather than just an empty shell going through motions. "You do not have to know yet," James said gently. "Everyone expects me to have plans, to move forward. Mrs. Henderson keeps asking if I have family to go to. Do you?" "No. My parents died when I was 16. Benjamin was all I had. He was my whole future." Her voice was still flat, but there was an edge of something beneath it now. Not quite pain, but the memory of pain, like a scar that still ached when pressed. "Now there is no future. There is just this, day after day of nothing. James turned to look at her profile, at the severe line of her jaw, the shadows under her eyes, the way she held herself like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. I am going to say something, and you are going to think it is stupid. Then why say it? Because it helped me once, and maybe it will help you. He took a breath. You do not have to hope right now. You do not have to believe things will get better or that life has meaning or that tomorrow will be worth seeing. You are too tired for that, and it is too heavy a burden to carry when you are barely surviving. So I will hope for both of us. Beatrice turned to look at him fully for the first time, really look at him, seeing past the weathered cowboy exterior to the man beneath who knew exactly what it felt like to drown in despair. What does that mean? It means I will hold onto the possibility that life can be worth living. I will carry that belief for you until you are strong enough to carry it yourself. You do not have to feel it or accept it or even believe me. You just have to keep breathing. I will handle the hoping. Why would you do that? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. Someone did it for me once. I am still here because of it. That seems like reason enough. Beatrice searched his face for dishonesty or pity or any of the things that would have made her reject his offer outright. She found none of those things. She found only quiet determination and a sadness that matched her own and something else she could not quite name. Not quite hope itself, but perhaps the willingness to carry its weight. I do not believe you, she said finally. I do not believe things get better. I know. I do not feel anything except tired. I know. I think I might feel this way forever. You will not, but you are allowed to feel this way now. Something in Beatrice's chest cracked, just a hairline fracture in the ice she had built around herself. Her eyes burned and her throat tightened, and for the first time since Benjamin died, she felt the pressure of tears trying to surface. She fought them viciously, refusing to let them fall, but the mere fact that she could feel them waiting was significant. James saw the struggle on her face and did what he had learned to do when his own grief had been too large to contain. He simply stood there, steady and present, making no demands, offering no false comfort, just existing beside her as proof that it was possible to survive the unsurvivable. I should go make breakfast, Beatrice said abruptly, turning away from him and from the tears she refused to shed. Mrs. Henderson is already cooking. I can smell the bacon. Then I should do something else, something useful. You could sit with me on the porch and watch the sunrise. That is useful. How is that useful? Because beauty still exists even when we cannot feel it. Witnessing it is an act of faith that someday we might feel it again. Beatrice wanted to argue, wanted to retreat to her room and her numbness, but she was suddenly so tired of being alone with her own emptiness. So she sat down on the porch steps, and James sat beside her, not too close but close enough, and they watched the sun climb over the mountains in silence. The days began to develop a rhythm after that. Beatrice found work helping Mrs. Henderson with the boarding house tasks, cleaning rooms and doing laundry and assisting with meals. The physical labor was grounding, giving her something to focus on beyond the endless circle of her own thoughts. James continued his work at the livery and took on odd jobs around town, fixing things that were broken, building things that were needed. They fell into an unspoken routine of spending time together without naming it as such. In the evenings after supper, they would sit on the porch while the heat of the day faded into cool desert night. Sometimes James would talk about inconsequential things, stories from his travels or observations about the town or memories from before his family died. He spoke about his younger sister who had loved catching fireflies, his mother who had made the best apple pie in 3 counties, his father who had taught him to work with wood and leather, and to always finish what he started. Beatrice mostly listened, contributing little, but she was listening. That was progress. One evening in early October, about a month after her arrival, James was describing the ranch where he had worked after leaving Montezuma the previous year when Beatrice interrupted him. "Why did you leave?" James was quiet for a moment, considering. "I got too comfortable. Started to feel like I deserved peace, and that scared me, so I ran." "That is stupid." "Yes, it was. Do you do that often? Run when things get good?" "I used to. I am trying to stop." Beatrice pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I used to run toward things, toward dreams, toward the future, toward hope. Benjamin and I ran toward New Mexico like it was some kind of promised land. Look where that got us. It got you here, to right now. That is something." "Is it? This does not feel like something. This feels like nothing." James turned to look at her. "You are talking to me. You are angry. You are feeling things even if they are hard things. A month ago you were not feeling anything at all. That is not nothing, Beatrice." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his voice did something strange to her. It reminded her that she was still a person, still Beatrice Kane who had once laughed and dreamed and loved. The ice around her heart developed another crack. "Do not do that," she said, but there was no real heat in it. "Do what? Make me feel things. It is easier when I do not." "Easier is not always better," says the man who spent years running from his own feelings. James smiled, just a small quirk of his lips, but it was genuine. "That is fair. I suppose I am a hypocrite." "You are." Beatrice found herself almost smiling in return, just the ghost of an expression, but it was there. "You are also stubborn, also fair." They sat in companionable silence after that, and when the temperature dropped enough to drive them inside, Beatrice felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not happiness, not yet, but perhaps the distant possibility of it. Like seeing lights from a town when you had been lost in the dark. Not there yet, but knowing the destination existed. As autumn deepened, Montezuma prepared for the coming winter. James helped several families repair their roofs and stock their woodpiles. Beatrice proved to have a talent for sewing and began taking in mending work from townspeople, earning small amounts of money that she saved carefully. She was not ready to think about a distant future, but she could handle the immediate one. Small goals, manageable tasks, one day at a time. She and James spent more time together, their conversations growing longer and more substantial. She learned that he had fought in the war at 17, too young but desperate to escape a life of poverty. He had seen terrible things and done terrible things, and come home to find his family dead from a house fire that could have been prevented if they had not been too poor to afford proper lamp oil. The guilt and grief had nearly killed him. "Tom Sullivan told me that surviving when others die is not a sin," James said one evening in late October. They were walking along the edge of town, watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. "He said the sin is wasting the life you still have." Took me 3 years to believe him. "Do you believe it now?" Beatrice asked. "Most days. Some days I have to remind myself again. I do not think I will ever believe it. You do not have to believe it today." Beatrice stopped walking and turned to face him. The setting sun caught in his gray eyes, turning them amber for a moment. "You keep saying things like that, like I have infinite time to figure this out. But what if I do not? What if this is just who I am now, broken and empty and unable to feel the things I used to feel?" James met her gaze steadily. "Then I will keep hoping for both of us. That was the deal. That is not fair to you. You should not have to carry my burden." "It is not a burden, it is a choice. And I choose to believe that the woman who buried her husband with her bare hands and survived being left for dead in the desert is strong enough to survive this too. I choose to believe that you will laugh again someday, and dream again, and feel joy again. You do not have to believe it. I believe it enough for both of us." Something shifted in Beatrice at those words. The ice around her heart cracked wider, and for the first time, she did not immediately try to freeze it over again. She let herself feel the warmth of his faith in her, even if she could not share it yet. She let herself lean into the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he was right. "You are the most stubbornly optimistic person I have ever met," she said, but her tone was softer now, almost affectionate. "That is not true. I am a realist. I just choose to focus on realistic good possibilities instead of realistic bad ones. That is optimism, if you say so." They walked back to the boarding house in the gathering dark, and when they reached the porch steps, Beatrice did something that surprised them both. She reached out and took James's hand, just for a moment, squeezing his fingers gently before letting go. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for hoping." James felt something warm unfold in his chest, something he had not felt in years. It took him a moment to recognize it as tenderness, as the beginning of something deeper than friendship or compassion. He was falling in love with her, he realized, with her strength and her pain and her fierce determination to keep going even when she did not believe going was worth it. He was falling in love with Beatrice Kane, and he had no idea what to do about it. "You are welcome," he managed to say, his voice rougher than usual. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her dark eyes, something that might have been recognition or might have been fear or might have been both. Then she turned and went inside, leaving James standing in the darkness, his hand still warm from her touch. November arrived with cold winds and the first dusting of snow on the distant peaks. Montezuma settled into the slower rhythm of winter, people spending more time indoors, conserving energy and resources for the hard months ahead. The boarding house became a gathering place in the evenings, with several residents and townspeople coming by to sit in the warm parlor and share stories and company. Beatrice found herself gradually emerging from her shell during these gatherings. At first she only listened, but eventually she began to contribute small comments, then observations, then actual stories. She talked about growing up in Missouri, about her mother's garden, about learning to sew from her grandmother. She did not talk about Benjamin, not yet, but she was talking about her life before Benjamin, reclaiming parts of herself that had existed before he defined her entire world. James watched this transformation with quiet joy, never pushing but always present. He had his own revelation during this time, understanding that hoping for someone was not the same as hoping they would become what you wanted them to be. He was not hoping Beatrice would return to who she was before tragedy struck. He was hoping she would discover who she could become after it. There was a crucial difference. One evening in mid-November, a traveling merchant came through town with news and goods to sell. He set up in the general store, and most of the town turned out to see what he had brought. Beatrice went with Mrs. Henderson, mostly for something to do, but she found herself drawn to a display of ribbons in various colors. She reached out to touch a blue one, soft as silk, the color of summer sky. "That would look beautiful in your hair," James said from beside her. She had not heard him approach. "I do not need ribbons," she said automatically, but she did not let go of the blue one. Need and want are different things. "Do you want it?" Beatrice considered this. Want was a dangerous thing, a crack in the armor she had built. Wanting meant caring, and caring meant being vulnerable to loss. But the ribbon was so soft, and it had been so long since she had allowed herself to want anything. "Maybe," she admitted. "Then you should have it." James reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins, handing them to the merchant before Beatrice could protest. "I can pay for my own ribbons," she said, but there was no real anger in her voice. "I know you can, but I wanted to buy it for you." "Why?" because you are starting to want things again. That seems worth celebrating." Beatrice took the ribbon from the merchant, running it through her fingers, feeling the texture, acknowledging the small spark of pleasure it brought her. It was such a tiny thing, barely significant, but it represented something larger. She was starting to want again. She was starting to feel again. "Thank you," she said to James, meeting his eyes, "not just for the ribbon." He understood what she meant. "You are doing the hard work. I am just keeping watch." That night, Beatrice tied the blue ribbon in her hair before going down to supper. Mrs. Henderson noticed immediately and complimented her. Several other boarding house residents did the same. Beatrice felt self-conscious, but also something else, something warm and light. She felt almost pretty. She felt almost alive. James said nothing about the ribbon, but his eyes lingered on her throughout the meal, and Beatrice found herself aware of his attention in a new way. She had been so focused on her own pain that she had not considered him as a man, only as a presence, a helper, a voice in the darkness. But now she saw him differently. She saw the strength in his weathered hands, the kindness in his storm-gray eyes, the quiet competence with which he moved through the world. She saw that he was handsome in a worn, authentic way. She saw that he looked at her with something deeper than compassion. The realization frightened her. She was not ready for this. She had only just started feeling again, and feelings were already so overwhelming. The thought of romantic feelings, of opening herself to that kind of vulnerability, was terrifying. She excused herself early from supper and went to her room, closing the door and leaning against it, her heart racing. This was too much too fast. She could not do this. She could not risk her heart again when she had barely begun to recover the pieces of it. But even as she thought this, she knew it was too late. The feelings were already there, growing whether she wanted them to or not. She was starting to care for James McCoy, and she had no idea how to stop it. The next morning, Beatrice was distant with James, responding to his greetings with short answers and avoiding his eyes. James noticed the change but did not push, giving her space while remaining available. He had learned patience the hard way, and he understood that healing was not linear. There would be good days and bad days, steps forward and steps back. This pattern continued for several days, Beatrice oscillating between allowing James's presence and retreating from it. She was fighting herself, he realized, fighting the feeling that was trying to bloom in her chest because she was not ready to trust it. He ached for her, wanted to tell her it was okay to be scared, that fear was proof she still cared enough to protect herself. But he said nothing, just continued to be steady and present, hoping for both of them. A week before Thanksgiving, a severe storm moved through the region, bringing heavy snow and howling winds. The temperature dropped dramatically, and everyone in Montezuma hunkered down to wait it out. The boarding house residents gathered in the parlor around the fireplace, sharing body heat and stories to pass the time. Beatrice found herself sitting next to James on the old sofa, close enough that their shoulders touched. At first, she was hyper-aware of the contact, every nerve in her body focused on the point where they connected. But as the hours passed and the storm raged outside, she gradually relaxed into it. His warmth was comforting, his presence solid and safe. She was so tired of being afraid. "Are you warm enough?" James asked quietly, speaking just to her while others in the room told stories and laughed. "Yes," Beatrice said. Then, more honestly, "No, I am always cold lately." Without a word, James stood and retrieved a blanket from the cabinet in the corner. He returned and spread it over both of them, creating a small cocoon of warmth. Beatrice pulled it up to her chin and let herself lean slightly into his shoulder. It was the most physically close they had been since that first night when she rode his horse, and this time she was choosing it consciously. "Can I ask you something?" she said, keeping her voice low. Anything. What if I am not who you think I am? What if I disappoint you? James turned his head to look at her, their faces only inches apart. You are exactly who I think you are, a strong woman who is surviving something that would have broken most people. A woman who is brave enough to keep going even when she does not want to. A woman who is starting to hope again even though it terrifies her. I know exactly who you are, Beatrice, and I am not disappointed. I am not brave, she whispered. I am scared all the time. Being scared and doing it anyway is the definition of brave. Beatrice held his gaze, searching for dishonesty or delusion, finding neither. Finding only steady gray eyes that saw her clearly and chose to care anyway. The ice around her heart cracked wider, and warmth began to seep through. I think I am starting to feel something for you, she admitted, the words barely audible. And it terrifies me because the last time I let myself feel, I lost everything. I know. James's voice was gentle. You do not have to act on it. You do not have to do anything with it. It is okay to just feel it and be scared. What if I lose you too? You might. That is the risk of caring about anyone. But the alternative is never caring about anyone, and that is just another way of being dead. Beatrice considered this, turning it over in her mind. She thought about the past 3 months, about how James had kept his promise to hope for both of them, about how his steady presence had created space for her to begin healing. She thought about the blue ribbon in her hair and the small ways she had started wanting things again. She thought about how love was always a risk, but so was refusing to love. I am not ready, she said finally. Not ready for anything serious or complicated. I am barely keeping my head above water as it is. Then we will take it slow as you need. What if I am never ready? Then we will be friends, and that will be enough. I'm not doing this because I expect something from you, Beatrice. I am doing this because you are worth it. Whatever you can give, whenever you can give it, that is enough. The tears that Beatrice had been holding back for 3 months finally broke through. They came silently, streaming down her face, hot and cleansing. She cried for Benjamin and for the future they would never have. She cried for her own suffering and for the long road still ahead. She cried for the fear and the hope and the terrifying possibility of loving again. James put his arm around her and let her cry against his shoulder, holding her steady while she fell apart. The other people in the room noticed and quietly gave them privacy, turning their attention elsewhere. Beatrice cried until she was empty, until the tears stopped coming, until she felt raw and exhausted and strangely lighter. I am sorry, she said, pulling back and wiping her face with her hands. Do not be. You needed that. I got your shirt all wet. It will dry. Beatrice almost laughed, just a small huff of air that was not quite humor but was close. You are impossible, so I have been told. They sat together under the blanket while the storm continued to rage outside, not speaking, just existing together in the warm room surrounded by the quiet chatter of other people. Beatrice felt something shift inside her, some fundamental change in how she held herself in the world. She was still sad, still scared, still grieving, but she was not alone, and that made all the difference. The storm passed by morning, leaving Montezuma blanketed in fresh snow that sparkled under a bright blue sky. The world looked clean and new, transformed overnight. Beatrice stood at her bedroom window and looked out at it, feeling the metaphor was almost too obvious. But obvious did not make it less true. She went downstairs to find James already up, working with several other men to clear snow from the main paths through town. She watched him work, admiring the efficiency of his movements, the easy way he laughed with the other men. He belonged here, she realized. He had made a place for himself in this community, had woven himself into the fabric of it. He had stopped running. When he came back to the boarding house for lunch, Beatrice met him at the door with a cup of hot coffee and a smile. It was not a big smile, just a small one, but it was genuine. "You look cold," she said. "I am frozen solid," he admitted, taking the coffee gratefully. "But it is good work. The whole town is coming together to help each other. Reminds you what people can do when they try. Mrs. Henderson is making stew for everyone. She sent me to tell you and the others to come eat. That woman is a saint. She is." Beatrice paused, then added, "She told me this morning that I am looking more like myself lately. I did not know what to say because I am not sure I remember who myself is." "Then you get to decide who yourself is now. You are not who you were before Benjamin died. You are not who you were the day I found you. You are becoming someone new, and you get to choose who that person is." Beatrice considered this, finding comfort in the idea that she did not have to return to some previous version of herself, but could instead create something new from the pieces that remained. "I think I want to be someone who is not afraid all the time. That is a good goal. I think I also want to be someone who can love again, eventually, when I am ready." James met her eyes and something hopeful flickered in his expression. "Also a good goal. I am not promising anything," she said quickly. "I am not asking for promises. I am just glad you are thinking about the future again, even if I am not in it." "I did not say you were not in it. I did not say you said that." Beatrice shook her head, almost smiling again. "You are twisting my words, maybe a little." They stood there for a moment, the cold air coming in through the open door, the smell of snow and coffee mingling, something warm and tentative growing between them. Then Beatrice reached out and squeezed his hand just briefly, before turning to go back inside. "Come eat before the stew gets cold," she said over her shoulder. James followed her inside, his heart full of something that felt dangerously close to joy. Thanksgiving came, and Mrs. Henderson organized a community dinner at the church. Everyone in town contributed what they could, creating a feast that, while modest by some standards, felt abundant with goodwill and fellowship. Beatrice helped with the cooking, finding pleasure in the work, in the camaraderie of the other women, in the sense of being part of something larger than herself. During the dinner, she sat between Mrs. Henderson and James, eating turkey and cornbread dressing and sweet potatoes. She listened to conversations flowing around her, contributing when she had something to say, content to simply listen when she did not. She felt present in a way she had not felt in months, anchored in the moment rather than lost in grief or fear. When it came time for people to share what they were thankful for, Beatrice found herself speaking without planning to. "I am thankful for second chances," she said, her voice clear in the crowded room. "I am thankful for the people who have shown me kindness when I needed it most. I am thankful for being alive, even when life is hard. And I am thankful for hope, especially when someone else carries it for me until I am strong enough to carry it myself." She looked at James as she said this last part, and the expression on his face made her heart skip. It was pure, unguarded emotion, love and pride and tenderness all mixed together. He did not say anything, just reached under the table and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. This time she did not pull away. December arrived with more snow and shorter days. Christmas preparations began, with families making simple decorations and planning modest celebrations. Beatrice found herself looking forward to the holiday for the first time since Benjamin's death. She was not fully healed, would probably never be fully healed from that loss, but she was learning to carry it differently. The grief was still there, but it no longer consumed her entirely. There was room now for other things, for friendship and community and the tentative possibility of love. She and James had fallen into an easy intimacy that was not yet romantic, but was clearly heading in that direction. They spent most of their free time together, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears. James told her about the years he spent wandering after his family died, working odd jobs across 3 territories, running from himself. Beatrice told him about her childhood, about the parents she had lost too young, about how Benjamin had seemed like salvation, like someone who would finally make her feel less alone in the world. "I thought if I loved him enough, it would fill the empty space my parents left," she admitted one evening. They were sitting in the boarding house kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed, drinking tea and watching the fire in the stove. "But that is not how it works. You cannot use one person to fix what another person's absence broke." "No," James agreed. "You have to fix that yourself. Other people can help, can be support, but they cannot do the healing for you." "Is that what you are doing with me, helping me heal?" "I am trying to be present while you heal yourself. There is a difference." Beatrice wrapped her hands around her teacup, absorbing its warmth. "I am glad you found me that day. I do not know what would have happened if you had not. You would have found your own way. You are stronger than you think." "Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to find out." She looked at him across the table, this man who had become so important to her without her quite noticing when it happened. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you think you will ever stop feeling guilty about surviving when your family did not?" James was quiet for a long moment, staring into his tea as if it held answers. "I do not know. The guilt is less than it used to be. There are whole days now when I do not think about it. But I suppose part of me will always carry it. I have learned to make peace with that." "How?" "By trying to live a life they would be proud of, by doing good when I can, by not wasting the gift of survival even when it feels more like a curse." He looked up at her. "By hoping for beautiful, broken women who have forgotten how to hope for themselves." Beatrice felt her breath catch. "James." "I am in love with you, Beatrice," he said simply. "I have been for a while now. You do not have to do anything about it or say anything back. I just wanted you to know. I am in love with you, and I will wait as long as you need me to wait. And if you never feel the same way, I will still consider knowing you one of the greatest privileges of my life." Beatrice set down her teacup with trembling hands. Her heart was racing, fear and hope tangling together in her chest. "I do not know if I can be what you need me to be. You already are. You are exactly who I need you to be. I am still grieving Benjamin. I know. You probably always will be a little bit. That is okay. Love is not a finite resource. You can grieve him and still have space for other feelings. What if I hurt you? Then I will heal. What if you do not hurt me? What if this works? Are you willing to let fear stop you from finding out?" Beatrice stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street, the dark mountains beyond, the endless stars overhead. She thought about Benjamin, about how much she had loved him, about how that love had not protected either of them from tragedy. She thought about the past 4 months, about how James had kept his promise to hope for both of them, about how his steady presence had given her space to become someone new. She thought about the blue ribbon in her hair and the way her heart lightened when she saw James smile. She thought about how life was always uncertain, always risky, how you could lose everything in an instant no matter how carefully you planned. She thought about how the only way to avoid loss was to never have anything worth losing, and that seemed like the saddest way to live. "I think I might be falling in love with you too," she said quietly, still facing the window. "It terrifies me, but I think it is happening anyway." She heard James stand, heard his footsteps crossing the kitchen floor. He stopped behind her, close but not touching, giving her space to change her mind. "We can take this as slow as you need. We do not have to call it anything or make any promises. We can just be two people who care about each other and see where it goes. I need slow, Beatrice confirmed. I need to not feel rushed or pressured. Slow is fine. Slow is good. Beatrice turned around to face him. In the dim light from the stove, his eyes were soft, his expression open and vulnerable. He had laid his heart bare for her, had taken the risk of rejection, had offered her everything without demanding anything in return. It was the bravest thing she had ever seen. I cannot promise I will not get scared and pull away, she said. I cannot promise I will be perfect either. But I promise I will be honest, and I promise I will be patient, and I promise I will keep hoping for both of us when you need me to. Beatrice reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact beyond holding hands. James stayed very still, letting her explore at her own pace, his eyes never leaving her face. I think I would like to kiss you, she whispered, but I am afraid it will be too much. Then we will wait until you are not afraid. What if I am always afraid? Then we will figure out how to be brave together. Beatrice stood there with her hand on his face, feeling his heartbeat through his shirt, feeling her own heart trying to match its rhythm. She thought about brave, about how James had defined it months ago. Being scared and doing it anyway. She was scared, but she wanted this anyway. She leaned up and pressed her lips to his, soft and tentative, barely more than a brush of contact. James let her control the kiss, not pushing, just responding gently. It was sweet and chaste and lasted only a few seconds before Beatrice pulled back, breathless. Okay, James asked softly. Okay, Beatrice confirmed. More than okay. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. It was not a dramatic moment or a grand declaration. It was simply two wounded people choosing to take a step toward healing together. It was enough. Christmas came and went, marked by modest gifts and heartfelt celebration. Beatrice gave James a pair of gloves she had sewn herself, lined with soft wool. James gave Beatrice a beautiful carved wooden box for her sewing supplies, with her initials engraved on the lid. They attended church services together, sat together at Mrs. Henderson's Christmas dinner, and spent the evening in the parlor with the other boarding house residents, singing carols and drinking wassail. When the evening ended and everyone went to bed, James walked Beatrice to her door as he had done countless times before. But this time, she did not immediately go inside. She stood in the hallway with him, holding his hands, memorizing his face. "Thank you for the box," she said. "It is beautiful. I made it myself, wanted it to be special." "It is, you are," she paused, gathering courage. "Would you like to go for a walk with me tomorrow, just the two of us? Maybe out to that place by the creek where the cottonwoods grow." Like a proper courting walk, James's eyes lit up. "If you want to call it that, I would like that very much." Beatrice smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Good, because I think I am ready to start courting you, James McCoy, slowly and carefully, but really courting you. I will court you so slowly and carefully you will forget we are even courting. I doubt that." "Good." James lifted her hands and kissed her knuckles gently. "Good night, Beatrice." "Good night, James." She watched him walk down the hall to his own room, watched until he disappeared inside and closed his door. Then she went into her room and sat on the bed, touching her lips where he had kissed her the night before, feeling something warm and bright blooming in her chest. It was not the wild, desperate love she had felt for Benjamin. It was something steadier, something that had grown slowly from friendship and shared grief and mutual understanding. It was something that felt strong enough to build a life on. The new year of 1879 arrived with cold winds and clear skies. Beatrice and James began courting in earnest, though anyone watching might have thought they had been courting for months already. Their relationship had been built so gradually, with such a strong foundation of friendship, that the romantic aspects just felt like a natural extension of what already existed. They took long walks when the weather permitted, bundled in coats and scarves, talking about their hopes for the future. James admitted he had been thinking about buying some land outside town, maybe starting a small ranch. Beatrice admitted she had been thinking about opening a dressmaking shop, using her sewing skills to create something that was truly hers. They talked about these dreams carefully, not quite ready to talk about shared dreams but getting closer. In February, James took Beatrice to a dance at the town hall. It was the first time she had danced since Benjamin died, and she was nervous, afraid the memories would be too painful. But when James took her in his arms and they moved together to the music, all she felt was the present moment. His hand solid on her waist, his gray eyes warm on her face, the gentle sway of the dance. It was not about replacing Benjamin or forgetting him. It was about choosing to live fully in the life she still had. "You are a good dancer," Beatrice said as they moved across the floor. "My mother taught me. She said a man who could not dance was only half civilized. Your mother was a wise woman. She was." James smiled at the memory, and Beatrice was glad to see it did not hurt him as much as it once had. They were both learning to hold their grief more gently, to let joy exist alongside loss. After the dance, as they walked back to the boarding house under a sky full of stars, James stopped and pulled something from his pocket. It was a small object wrapped in cloth. "I want to give you something," he said, "but I want you to know there are no expectations attached to it. It is just a gift, nothing more or less than that unless you want it to be more." Beatrice unwrapped the cloth to reveal a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. It was beautiful in its simplicity, clearly handmade, clearly chosen with care. "James," she breathed. "It is not an engagement ring," he said quickly. "Not unless you want it to be. But I saw it in the jeweler's shop in Sakaro when I went there last month, and I thought of you. I thought about how you are like turquoise, beautiful and strong and rare. I thought about how I want you to have beautiful things. So I bought it. And if you want to wear it just as a gift, that is fine. And if someday you want it to mean more, that is also fine. And if you do not want it at all, I will understand." Beatrice looked at the ring, then at James, then at the ring again. She thought about how far she had come in 6 months, from a woman who wanted to die in the desert to a woman who was choosing to live, to hope, to love again. She thought about how James had kept his promise, had hoped for both of them when she could not hope for herself, had given her the space and time to heal at her own pace. "I want to wear it as a promise," she said slowly. "A promise that I am choosing this, choosing us, choosing a future together. Not an engagement, not yet, but a promise that I see a future where that is possible." James's face broke into the brightest smile she had ever seen from him. "That is more than I dared to hope for. You hoped for it anyway. You always do. I suppose I do." Beatrice handed him the ring and held out her left hand. James slid it onto her ring finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She looked at it catching the starlight, this symbol of possibility, of future, of hope. "I love you," she said, and it was the first time she had said it first, without prompting or in response. "I love you, James McCoy. I love you too, Beatrice Kane. I have loved you since the day I found you putting stones on your husband's grave with bloody hands and dry eyes. I loved your strength even before I knew your name." They kissed there in the starlight, and it was deeper than before, more sure, full of promise and passion and the knowledge that they had earned this, had worked for it, had chosen it consciously and with clear eyes. When they finally pulled apart, Beatrice felt complete in a way she had not felt since before Benjamin died. Not because James completed her, but because she had finally become whole enough to share her life with someone else. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and painting the desert with wildflowers. James found a piece of land for sale 5 miles outside Montezuma, 40 acres with a creek running through it, and good grazing for cattle. He took Beatrice to see it, and they walked the property together, imagining what it could become. "We could build a house here," James said, pointing to a flat area with a view of the mountains. "And a barn over there. Start with a small herd of cattle, maybe some chickens and pigs. Build it up slowly." Beatrice asked, her heart quickening. James turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Beatrice Kane, I know we said we would take things slow, and we have been. It has been 8 months since I found you. 8 months of watching you heal and grow and become the strongest woman I have ever known. I do not want to rush you, but I also do not want to let fear stop me from asking for what I want. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you on this land. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to face whatever comes next together. Will you marry me?" Beatrice looked at him, at this man who had saved her without trying to fix her, who had hoped for her without making her feel inadequate, who had loved her patiently and steadily until she was strong enough to love him back. She thought about Benjamin and knew he would want her to live, to love again, to be happy. She thought about the woman she had been when James found her, empty and broken, and the woman she was now, whole and hopeful and ready for whatever came next. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I will marry you." James let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around while she laughed. It was the first time she had laughed like that, uninhibited and full of pure happiness, since before Benjamin died. It felt like coming back to life. They were married in April, on a warm spring day with the whole town in attendance. Mrs. Henderson organized everything, recruiting help from every woman in Montezuma. Beatrice wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue like the sky, with the blue ribbon James had bought her months ago woven into her hair. James wore a new suit, his hair freshly cut, looking more handsome than Beatrice had ever seen him. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with the minister reading verses about love and commitment. When James said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. When Beatrice said hers, she cried, but they were happy tears this time, tears of joy and gratitude and hope. "I promise to love you in grief and in joy," she said, holding both his hands. "I promise to choose you every day, even on the hard days. I promise to hope with you, to dream with you, to build a life with you. You saved me when I could not save myself, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift." "You were already worthy," James said softly. "You just had to see it yourself." They kissed as husband and wife to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. It felt like a beginning, like the first page of a new story that they would write together. The reception was held in the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Beatrice danced with James, with Mrs. Henderson, with the mayor and the shopkeeper and the rancher who had given James his first job in Montezuma. She felt surrounded by love, by community, by people who had welcomed her when she was a stranger and cared for her when she was broken. As the sun set and the dancing continued, James led Beatrice outside for a moment alone. They stood in the fading light, his arms around her waist, her head on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. "I did not think I would ever be happy again, but I am. Because of you. Because of you too. You did the hard work of healing. I just kept watch. You did more than that. You gave me something to heal toward. You were the future when I could not see one." James kissed her temple, her cheek, her lips. "I love you, Mrs. McCoy." "I love you too, Mr. McCoy." They stood there until the last light faded from the sky and the stars emerged, bright and constant. Then they went back inside to their wedding celebration, to their friends and their community, to the beginning of their life together. James and Beatrice moved to their land the week after the wedding, camping in a tent while James built their house. It was hard work, but they did it together, Beatrice helping where she could, both of them falling into bed exhausted every night. But it was good exhaustion, the kind that came from building something meaningful. The house took shape slowly over the summer. It was not large or fancy, just 4 rooms with a front porch and a solid roof, but it was theirs. They built it with their own hands, made it strong enough to withstand the harsh winters and hot summers of New Mexico. By September, exactly 1 year after Beatrice had buried Benjamin in the desert, they moved into their completed home. That night, they lay in their bed in their house on their land, wrapped in each other's arms, and Beatrice marveled at how much could change in a year. She had gone from wanting to die to wanting to live with every fiber of her being. She had gone from having no future to having a future full of possibilities. She had gone from being unable to hope to being full of it. "Are you thinking about him?" James asked softly. He knew what day it was, had known without her having to say anything. "Yes," Beatrice admitted. "I was thinking about how much I have changed since then, how I thought my life was over but it was just beginning a new chapter." "You feel guilty for being happy?" "Sometimes, but less than I used to. I think Benjamin would be glad I found you. He was a good man. He would want me to live fully." "I hope so. I hope he knows I will take care of you." Beatrice rolled over to face James, touching his face in the darkness. "You already do, every day, in 1,000 small ways." They made love that night, slow and tender, celebrating the life they were building and the love that had grown between them. Afterward, as James drifted off to sleep, Beatrice lay awake for a while longer, thinking about hope and healing and second chances. She thought about the woman who had refused to hope, and the man who had said he would hope for both of them until she could hope again. He had kept that promise, and in doing so, he had saved her life. The years that followed were good ones, full of the kind of quiet joy that comes from a life well lived. James and Beatrice built their ranch slowly and steadily, starting with a small herd of cattle that they gradually expanded. Beatrice opened her dressmaking shop in town, working from home 3 days a week and going into Montezuma the other 2 days to meet with clients. They were not rich, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. In the spring of 1880, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She was excited to become a mother, but terrified of all the things that could go wrong. James was patient with her fears, listening when she needed to talk, holding her when she needed comfort, reminding her that they would face whatever came together. Their son was born in December, healthy and strong, with James's gray eyes and Beatrice's dark hair. They named him Thomas Sullivan McCoy, after the man who had saved James and in turn had made it possible for James to save Beatrice. It was a name that honored the importance of second chances and the people who made them possible. Beatrice proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, though she sometimes struggled with fear that something would happen to Thomas. James helped her find balance, gently encouraging her to trust that not every story ended in tragedy. They raised Thomas together, sharing the work and the joy equally. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Emily Grace, who was fierce and stubborn from birth. And 3 years after that, another son, Daniel Benjamin, named for Beatrice's first husband because she wanted to honor his memory and show her children that love was big enough to hold space for multiple people and multiple stories. As their children grew, Beatrice and James told them stories about resilience and hope, and choosing to live even when life was hard. They taught them about honest work and treating people with kindness, and never giving up on someone who was struggling. They built a good life on that land outside Montezuma, a life full of love and laughter and purpose. Mrs. Henderson remained a close friend until her death in 1891, and Beatrice and James made sure to pass on her legacy of kindness to strangers and generosity toward those in need. They often opened their home to travelers who needed a place to stay, remembering how important such kindness had been to both of them in their darkest times. The ranch prospered, and as the children grew, they each found their own paths. Thomas became a teacher, Emily married a rancher from a neighboring property, and Daniel followed in his father's footsteps, taking over the ranch when James was ready to retire. Through it all, Beatrice and James remained deeply in love, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. They had built something that lasted, something that had started from the ruins of grief and grown into something beautiful. They had kept their promises to each other, choosing love every single day, even on the hard days. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, they sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the mountains. They were in their 60s now, grayed and weathered by time, but still strong, still present, still choosing each other. "You remember the day I found you?" James asked, holding Beatrice's hand. "Every detail," she said. "I remember thinking you were either going to save me or kill me, and I did not much care which. You were the saddest person I had ever seen, and the strongest. I did not feel strong, I felt broken. You were both. Broken and strong, the two are not mutually exclusive." James kissed her hand. "I am glad I found you that day. I am glad, too, you gave me my life back. You gave me purpose. You reminded me why surviving was worth it." Beatrice leaned her head on James's shoulder, watching the sky turn orange and pink and purple. She thought about that day 31 years ago when she had buried Benjamin with her own hands and believed her life was over. She thought about how wrong she had been, how the worst day of her life had led eventually to the best years of her life. "I hope for us every day," she said softly. "I hope for more sunsets like this, more years together, more chances to choose each other. You taught me how to hope again, and I have never stopped." "We hope for each other," James said. "That is how it works. On the days when one of us is tired, the other one carries the hope. That is what love is." "Yes," Beatrice agreed. "That is exactly what love is." They sat there until the stars came out, until the night air grew cool and they moved inside to the warm house full of memories and love. Their children would visit tomorrow with their grandchildren, and there would be celebration and laughter and the joy of family. But for now, it was just the two of them, the lonely cowboy and the woman who had refused to hope, who had found each other in the desert and built a life worth living. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing family that surrounded Beatrice and James. They became known throughout the region as people you could count on, people who would help without asking for anything in return. They had learned from their own experiences that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could change the trajectory of someone's entire life. In 1914, as Beatrice was nearing 70, she fell ill with pneumonia. For several weeks, it was uncertain whether she would recover. James rarely left her side, holding her hand, reading to her, reminding her of all the reasons she had to keep fighting. Their children and grandchildren took turns sitting with them, filling the house with love and life. Beatrice pulled through, though the illness left her frailer than before. But her spirit remained strong, and she was determined to have more years with James and her family. As she recovered, she reflected on how lucky she was to have had this life. How easily she could have died in the desert that day in 1878. How everything that came after was a gift she had almost refused. "I am glad I let you hope for me," she told James one evening as they sat together in their room. "I am glad you did not give up." "You made it easy," James said. "You were always worth hoping for. Even when I was mean to you, you were never mean, you were hurt. There is a difference." Beatrice smiled, reaching up to touch his face, now deeply lined but still handsome to her eyes. "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. I did not think that was possible, but it is. That is how it should be. Love that does not grow is not really love." They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, surrounded by their 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. It was a joyous occasion, full of food and music and stories. Beatrice's dressmaking shop had long since been taken over by her daughter Emily, who had a talent for it that rivaled her mother's. The ranch was thriving under Daniel's management, expanded now to include not just cattle but also horses that were known for their quality throughout New Mexico. As Beatrice looked around at the family she and James had created, at all the lives they had touched, and the legacy they were building, she felt profound gratitude. This life, this abundant, beautiful life, had grown from the darkest moment she had ever experienced. It had grown because one man had chosen to hope when she could not, had chosen to be present and patient and steadfast. James caught her eye across the crowded room and smiled. And after 40 years together, she could still read everything he was thinking in that smile. He was thinking the same thing she was, marveling at how far they had come, how much they had built together, how love had transformed both their lives. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, they lay in bed together talking about the future. "I wonder if we will make it to 50 years, Beatrice mused. "That would be something, would it not? 50 years of marriage. We will make it," James said with conviction. "We have too much stubbornness between us to quit now." "Is that what you call it, stubbornness?" "Stubbornness, determination, refusal to give up. Call it whatever you want, but we will make it to 50 years and beyond." Beatrice snuggled closer to him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the comfort of his solid presence. "I hope you are right. I am always right about hope. It is my specialty." "Your specialty is being impossible." "That too." They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had done for 40 years. It was the kind of deep contentment that came from a life well lived and shared with the right person. The years marched on, bringing changes but also continuity. James and Beatrice grew older but remained active in their community and close to their family. They sat on the porch most evenings, watching sunsets and talking about everything and nothing, still finding new things to discover about each other even after decades together. In 1926, they attended the wedding of their youngest grandchild, a joyous celebration that reminded them of their own wedding nearly 50 years earlier. At the reception, the young couple asked James and Beatrice for advice on a lasting marriage. "Hope for each other," Beatrice said without hesitation. "On the days when one of you cannot hope, let the other one hope for both of you. That is how you survive the hard times. And love each other through the changes," James added. "You are not going to be the same people in 20 years that you are today. Make sure you keep falling in love with who the other person is becoming." The young couple thanked them, and Beatrice and James shared a look full of shared history and deep understanding. They had lived these truths, had proven them through nearly 5 decades of marriage. When April came in 1929, marking their 50th wedding anniversary, their family organized a massive celebration. People came from across the territory, friends and family and people whose lives had been touched by James and Beatrice's kindness over the years. The party was held at the ranch, with long tables set up outside and music playing and children running everywhere. During the celebration, their oldest son Thomas stood up to make a speech. He was 56 now, a respected teacher with grandchildren of his own. "My parents have taught me many things," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "But the most important lesson was about hope. My mother came from tragedy, had every reason to give up on life. My father carried hope for her until she was strong enough to carry it herself. They taught me that love is not just about the good times. Love is about showing up for each other when things are hard. It is about choosing each other every single day. It is about believing in each other's strength even when that strength is not immediately visible. On behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you both for showing us what real, lasting love looks like. Congratulations on 50 years together. May you have many more." The crowd erupted in applause, and Beatrice found herself crying happy tears. James put his arm around her and pulled her close, kissing her temple. 50 years, he murmured. We made it, she agreed. Thank you for hoping for me. Thank you for letting me. They cut the anniversary cake together, their hands clasped on the knife, just as they had cut their wedding cake 50 years earlier. So much had changed since that spring day in 1879. The world had changed, they had changed, but their love had remained constant, growing deeper and richer with each passing year. As the party continued into the evening, Beatrice found herself thinking about Benjamin Kane, about the young woman she had been when she loved him, about how she carried no guilt anymore for having found happiness after his death. She had room in her heart for both stories, for both loves. Benjamin had been part of her journey and James had been part of her destination. Both were important. Both were real. The final years of their lives were peaceful. James passed away in his sleep in 1932 at the age of 84, holding Beatrice's hand just as he had held it for 53 years. She grieved him deeply, but not with the same devastating emptiness she had felt when Benjamin died. She was sad, profoundly sad, but she was not broken. She had lived a full life with James, had loved him and been loved by him, and that was something to be grateful for even as she mourned his absence. Beatrice lived for 3 more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent her final years telling stories about James, about their life together, about the importance of hope and resilience and choosing love even when it seemed impossible. She wanted her family to understand that the best things in life often came after the hardest trials, that giving up meant missing out on all the beauty that could still come. On a warm September evening in 1935, Beatrice died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. It was 57 years to the day since Benjamin had been killed and James had found her in the desert. The symmetry seemed fitting, as if her story had come full circle. They buried her next to James in the small cemetery outside Montezuma, under a cottonwood tree with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The headstone reads simply, Beatrice Kane McCoy, 1853–1935. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, she learned to hope again. At the funeral, their children and grandchildren shared stories about Beatrice and James, about their love and their legacy. They talked about the ranch that still thrived, now in its 4th generation of family ownership. They talked about the countless people Beatrice and James had helped over the years, the kindness they had shown, the example they had set. Their oldest grandson, now a man in his 50s with children of his own, told the story he had heard many times about how James had found Beatrice in the desert, broken and hopeless, and had promised to hope for both of them until she could hope again. He talked about how that simple promise had changed both their lives and had rippled out to affect everyone who came after them. They taught us that love is not just a feeling, he said. It is a choice, a commitment, a promise to show up even when it is hard. They taught us that hope is not naive optimism. It is the stubborn refusal to let despair have the final word. They taught us that healing takes time and that it is okay to lean on others when you cannot stand alone. These are the gifts they gave us, and these are the gifts we must pass on to our children and grandchildren. The family gathered at the ranch house after the funeral, filling the home that James and Beatrice had built with their own hands. They ate and told stories and cried and laughed, celebrating a life well lived and a love that had transformed not just two people but generations. As the sun set that evening, several of the grandchildren stood on the porch where James and Beatrice had spent so many evenings watching the sky change colors. They could almost feel their grandparents' presence there, could almost hear James's voice saying something wry and Beatrice laughing in response. The house, the land, the family itself, all of it was testament to what two people could build when they chose hope over despair, love over fear, and each other over everything else. The ranch continued to thrive through the decades that followed, passed down through the generations, each one adding to the legacy while honoring the foundation that James and Beatrice had built. The story of the lonely cowboy and the woman who refused to hope became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder of where they came from and what they were built on. The dressmaking shop in Montezuma, now a fourth-generation business, still had the wooden box James had made for Beatrice displayed prominently, her initials worn but still visible after more than a century. Customers would ask about it, and whoever was working that day would tell the story of Beatrice Kane and James McCoy, of hope and healing and love that lasted. In the end, their story was not about tragedy or even about survival, though both were part of it. Their story was about the transformative power of hope, about what becomes possible when one person believes in another person's future, even when that person cannot believe in it themselves. It was about how love can grow in the most unlikely circumstances, how it can take root in grief and blossom into something beautiful and lasting. James and Beatrice had started with nothing but pain and loss, and a promise to hope for each other. From that foundation, they had built a life, a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. They had proved that endings could become beginnings, that the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures, and that hope, when carried faithfully, could transform everything. Their love story became the foundation that all the following generations built upon, a reminder that choosing hope, choosing love, and choosing each other was always worth it, no matter how impossible it seemed at the time. And in the hearts of their descendants, James and Beatrice lived on, forever young and in love, forever sitting on that porch watching the sunset, forever proving that hope was never foolish and love was never wasted.